The New York Times has demanded that OpenAI destroy any systems that were trained using their work. In a response, OpenAI warns that it would be impossible to train today's leading AI models without using copyrighted materials. OpenAI wants people to believe that copyright infringement is the necessary evil for developing AI systems that meet people's needs. What are AI-generated images, or commonly known as AI art? These images come from models such as Stable Diffusion and Midjourney. An image's creation's first step is when a user enters a prompt. The model would then predict what pixels could be associated with the prompt and quickly create an image. These images would be high quality. Depending on the prompt, it could look like a hyper-realistic photo or a stylistic illustration. These kinds of images are already groundbreaking. Currently, they circle around the internet impersonating as art. It is difficult to go through Google Images without finding AI-generated images. More and more generative AI technology is being based on these kinds of models, such as OpenAI's Sora. Companies want to cash into this new technology by selling their data to these companies, for example, one of them being Tumblr. However, despite their popularity and convenience, not all of it is fluffiness and rainbows. In fact, there is something quite wrong with these images. According to the authors of the Glaze paper, in particular, models can learn to mimic the artistic style of specific artists after fine-tuning on samples of their art. What does that possibly mean? This means that pieces of art have been taken to train these generative AI models to mimic art pieces. This, however, is not limited to artists but also applies to photographs and other images. For example, Stable Diffusion is trained on the Lion aesthetic, which is a visual database with over 5 billion images. There are even websites like Civit AI that are dedicated to uploading and distributing models that are trained on artists or celebrity likenesses without consent. This is the biggest problem with AI-generated images. Even though copyright is a complicated thing, it is one of the only factors that protects many industries, especially in the creative industry. Copyright is one of the only things that's protecting artists as of now. In January of 2023, 3 artists, Sarah Anderson, Kelly McKernan, and Carla Ortiz, filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against several text-to-image generators. They claim that it is legally required to obtain consent of artists before training neural nets on their work, and that these companies infringed on the rights of millions of artists by doing so. Right now, this honestly sucks pretty badly, and you might have the urge to burn all of this down. But it is possible to be supportive of generative AI under certain conditions. Here, we will give some conditions where it would be healthy to support generative AI. Imagine. First, we need to make sure that the training data is either copyright-free data or data that the owners have consented to. With this regulation, there will be less people frustrated with their data being collected to be fed into a training dataset for generative AI. OpenAI, however, is already aware that copyright is a big barrier to overcome and has called for copyright exemption. They currently say that it would be impossible to train today's leading AI models without using copyrighted materials. With the funding that OpenAI currently has, OpenAI has enough money to buy copyright from many different sources. It should be worthwhile to use these funds to appropriately pay for the copyright usage for the data it collects for training. This means that, ideally, the copyright data trained models that currently exist should be scrapped until an ethically sourced training dataset has been obtained to train a model. Unfortunately, that will not be the case as many models such as Stable Diffusion are already in many computers and all around, and it would be impossible to wipe them all until a new model is ethically created. Another condition to let generative AI become more ethical as a technology is to focus on diversity and inclusion. By intentionally including a wide range of data that reflects different genders, ethnicities, ages, and other demographic variables, we can reduce the reinforcement of sexual and ethnic stereotypes. According to an article written by Surajit Ghosh and Aileen Kaliskan, one of the issues we see in text-to-image generators is that they reinforce sexual and ethnic stereotypes. This paper specifically talks about how if a person types person into the text-to-image generator Stable Diffusion, it will generally create a white man. However, if a person types woman from Venezuela into Stable Diffusion, it would lead to an NSFW image of an AI-generated woman. Less diverse datasets and inappropriate labeling in machine learning training data leads to stereotype results like that. Another example of racial bias is when somebody entered Hatsune Miku yelling at a police officer in a Detroit suburb into a text-to-image generator. It created an image of a black version of Hatsune Miku, who's primarily a Japanese anime-like character, associating Detroit and yelling at police with black people. Overall, this echoes Google's offending incident in 2015 where it classified a picture of black people as gorillas. To rectify this error, however, Google removed the label directly. Nonetheless, the underlying dataset retains its bias and should be worked on to combat it. Gemini, Google's own large language model, has done some work to try to combat this bias issue. However, their solution is, honestly, pretty terrible. They would add minority group features into prompts without the user asking for them to do so, leading to results that seem to force diversity into the output. This does not fix the underlying issue of a biased training dataset with appropriate labels. Although popular models like GPT-3 and Stable Diffusion are capable of performing outstanding tasks such as mimicking human language and creating images, it also internalized a lot of toxic content from the internet due to obscure data collection without documentation. Most of the data is gathered with improper means, such as taking copyrighted data without consent. Because of that, this leads to a lack of documentation to avoid keeping the creators of GPT-3 and Stable Diffusion accountable. The lack of documentation due to stealing data implies that stealing data for training purposes is not a sustainable way to gather data. Stealing aside, it is important to maintain records of data collection in the long run. Data should be properly labeled with the following: where the data was collected, when the data was collected, how the data was collected, ownership of the data, and the copyright status of the data. This information should be available to all of those who are involved with the data, including those who collect it, those who own the data, and those who own the copyright to the data. People who own the data should also have the right to remove the data from the dataset. This is to avoid a whole concept that an AI is a black box that creates results without explanation, and it allows for transparency on why an AI makes decisions. As of this time, text-to-image generative AI is very harmful. Even though it is an extremely convenient tool, the current foundation it is built upon is unethical and possibly illegal. What it can create is possibly damaging to our own image of real life and perspectives. The ways that we have suggested should help keep text-to-image generative AI to be a less harmful tool that can help keep the creators accountable, work stolen less, and create a more representational outputs. Generative AI is a great tool with lots of potential, but not the way its foundation is built at the moment. It is still important to aim for ethics as generative AI improves on a massive scale. The principles we propose to make are not easy to do. We do not currently know how feasible our ideas are. As of now, untraining an AI model is not something that is commonly done, especially when it comes to unlearning specific pieces of data that people would like to retract. If we want to establish this principle within the law or rules within generative AI companies such as OpenAI, it would require much more technological advancement. However, as the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, has recently asked for $7 trillion, which is, keep in mind, more than double of France's GDP for their AI chip project. $7 trillion is insane. Even with a small portion of what is remaining, it is possible to explore the boundaries of what can be possible when it comes to untraining data. Similarly, it is going to be a difficult thing to properly annotate billions of training data. This would require a massive team, lots of time, and lots of money. This amount of money would possibly be in the billions range as of now, and for purchasing copyrights of data owners, also in the billions. Will this bankrupt companies like OpenAI and Midjourney? Maybe not OpenAI. They most likely won't become closed AI, especially if they end up receiving this $7 trillion fund. Other companies, however, bankruptcy looks possible, but that's not an excuse. They should be able to rely on proper ethical methods to sustain themselves. For the artists out there are tools like Glaze and Nightshade. Let's talk about Glaze first. Glaze is a tool developed by the University of Chicago. According to their own website, Glaze is a system designed to protect artists from style mimicry. At a high level, Glaze works by understanding the AI models that are training on human art and using machine learning algorithms, computing a set of minimal changes to the artworks, such that it appears unchanged to the human eye, but appears to AI models like a dramatically different art style. To summarize that, this means that there's almost a protective film being placed above your art that blocks the AI's vision of recognizing it. Often, it is a good idea to use Glaze on your artwork before posting it online if you want to avoid it being scrapped to train generative AI models. To take it a step further, there is another tool called Nightshade, which is created by the same creators of Glaze. Nightshade is an offensive tool that artists can use as a group to disrupt models that scrape their images without consent. There is a useful analogy to understand this. Let's say your lunch keeps going missing in your company fridge. Somebody keeps stealing it. Then one day you've had enough. You don't want your food to keep being taken, so you put some secret spicy sauce to your lunch. A few days later, miraculously, nobody is taking your lunch anymore. Nightshade is supposed to be the spicy sauce covering your artwork so people will stop taking it. Creators deserve to be able to post their works online without any caution. Nobody wants to keep putting spicy sauce all over their food all the time. Glaze and Nightshade are defense mechanisms out of desperation. People want to trust the online space and to keep themselves safe at the same time, but that does not mean that they are anti-technology and are refusing to adapt to a new technology. Generative AI suddenly intruded onto a space where we, artists, thought it was safe. We don't like the future where machines have to modify art just to post it. As an artist myself, and the editor too, I just want to post my art minutes after I completed it. Nightshade and Glaze is honestly a pain, and I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have to use these tools. But if AI companies put in their principles that we had explained earlier, it would be a safer place for us all.